Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here with you today, and I'm really looking forward to sharing with you some insights and ideas about how we can design products and services for the circular economy. As was mentioned, my name is Leyla Acaroglu, and I am a designer and sociologist. I'm also an entrepreneur and deeply passionate about activating sustainability wherever we can to design a future that works better for all of us. Now, I was actually named Champion of the Earth in 2016 for my work in advancing sustainability and innovation. I'm deeply honored to have received this award from the United Nations Environment Programme, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to share some of the ideas and tools that I've learned over my 2 decades of experience in working to use design as one of the core tools for the transformation to the circular economy. I run a design agency where we take commissions to create educational initiatives and tools and resources to support this. I also run a school called the Unschool of Disruptive Design, where we used to run experiential programs all over the world, but because of COVID, we have suspended the in-person and we now do everything online. I also have been fortunate enough to design a lot of different curriculums like the Circular Classroom, which is completely free, you can download it, and a lot of other resources that you might find useful after my talk. You're welcome to grab any of these for free online at the Unschools. And if you are deeply interested in sustainability in your own life, then I recommend this initiative that I collaborated with the United Nations on called the Anatomy of Action. It's the 5 everyday lifestyle tips that we can all do: the food we buy, the stuff that we consume, the way we move around our city, how we spend our money, and the fun we have. These are all the different lifestyle impact categories where we can make different choices to help bring about more sustainable living and lifestyles. Now, my most recent initiative that we'll be launching in 2023 is an online corporate training platform to help companies around the world level up their employees to be skilled in sustainability from a technical standpoint, as well as climate literacy and the circular economy. And that's an online training platform called Swivel Skills, where we provide asynchronous learning experiences for companies. But what am I going to share with you today? Well, first of all, I truly believe that any of the big crises we face, climate change, ocean plastic waste, deforestation, political unrest, all of these issues are partly because people avoid problems. And these problems, if we can learn to love them, if we understand them and we work from a systemic framework, then we each have the capacity to help redesign them. And that to me is so important, because this concept of sustainability that's been around for decades is not just about hugging trees or doing the right thing. It's really about changing the way we see the world, our role within it as humans, and the way we respect and value nature. It's so critical that sustainability becomes embedded in the DNA of our organizations, our own understanding of our biophysical reality to respect and cherish the natural world, as well as our societies and culture. Now, sustainable development, it's not a new concept, it's been around for a while, but essentially it's about making decisions today that don't negatively affect future generations or even intergenerations. Right now, there are many inequities that exist within the economy. And so the circular economy is really trying to rectify that by ensuring that when we make economic choices, that we're also considering the social and environmental implications. And this is the critical thing, because the economy cannot exist without nature. We can't exist without nature. We are all biological beings. We require natural services to exist. And to thrive, we need a healthy and respected and regenerated environment, because we require all of the resources that come from nature to drive our economic activities, as well as provide food, water, and of course, air. And this is the transformation that we see right now. Around the world, there are different pressures that are driving companies and individuals and governments to take action. So we're seeing a shift when it comes to consumption practices by individuals, But we're also seeing a shift when it comes to workers within companies wanting to align with value-based companies, meaning the organizations that they go to every day, they want to see that they too are also making sure that they're good corporate citizens, that they're not being exploitative, and that they're not essentially degrading the natural world. So these two pressures are playing out, as is regulation. I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of ESG, or environmental social governance. In the European Union, for example, there is legislation that requires all publicly listed companies to report on their ESG taxonomy alignment. And this is critical to the progress of rebuilding after COVID, the concept of the Green New Deal. And we're seeing this around the world in different jurisdictions, different countries, and at the local level as well as the federal level. Unfortunately, though, despite there being progress, we're also seeing a lack of commitment and action from some of the biggest players in the market. So of the big companies in the world, a report from last year showed that only 38% of major companies actually have action commitments on climate change. So for me, though, this is a huge innovation opportunity, because if there's pressures from the market, if there's pressures from the reality of nature requiring us to transform, then there's an opportunity for us to innovate. And as each of us, no matter who we are, where we live in the world, and what resources we have, we are all citizen designers of a better future. The activities that we take today, that we make, whether it be in how we vote, with our money, or with our political power, ultimately drives the types of the products and services that end up in the economy and the decisions made by government and those elected officials. So for me, it's so important that nature and the environment and our role within it is foremost within people's minds when making their decisions. Because this world that we live in, everything in it is by design. Meaning the cities that we live in, the houses that we go home to, the products that we fill them with, these are all designed artifacts. They're created to meet human needs and desires. And because of the fact that design is used as this complex tool to construct the world around us to meet human needs, we draw from nature to create the goods and services, be it a cell phone or a couch. These things that fill our lives are the products of this creative practice of design. And therefore, this rule that we use to form the world, design, can be used to help transform it. And design is really about understanding parameters and working to solve problems using what's available to you to create new solutions. And so for me, design is a critical tool in achieving the circular economy, because we need to redesign everything to fit within the complex natural systems that we are a part of. Because the planet is interdependent, and we too are interdependent on the natural world. And it unfortunately has limits, meaning we can only take so many resources and put so much pollution back into the natural world before it creates unintended consequences, such as climate change. And this is the magic of this planet, which right now is still the only known life-sustaining planet in the entire universe, is that we have this unique zone of life that we all live in. From just under the surface of the earth up to the atmosphere, this magic cacophony of animals and plants and atmosphere and all of the chemicals that work to drive the different processes that are at play. Ultimately, this beautiful system, what we are a part of, is what we are also destroying in our attempt to grow our economy and have our way when it comes to, consumption and economic productivity, but at the cost of the systems that sustain us and sustain life. So for me, this is the fundamental shift, and we're seeing changes happen. Like, I'm sure you're familiar with the company Patagonia and the fact that the CEO just a few weeks ago announced that they'll be making a trust, and the company will see nature as a key stakeholder and shareholder in the company's decision making. Now, the idea that humans have started to use resources at a faster rate than we can replenish is called the ecological footprint methodology. And if you haven't done your eco footprint as an individual, I highly recommend it. You can go online and find an online tool for your region, and you can answer some questions, and it'll tell you how many Earths are required to sustain you if everybody in the world lived as you do. Now, some countries like the United States have huge ecological footprints and other countries have smaller ones. And it's interesting to see what choices we can make as individuals around how we travel, what we eat, what we buy to reduce our footprint. But globally, we use up 1.7 Earths every single year. And you can see from this graph that around about the 1980s, we started to extract and process resources at a faster rate than the Earth could replenish. This has led us into what geologists and scientists are calling the Anthropocene. It's actually argued that around the 1950s, humanity drove so many changes on the Earth that we've actually entered into a new geological era called the Anthropocene, anthro meaning human, meaning the age of humans. Before this, for about 11,000 years, we lived in a stable climatic environment called the Holocene. And so whilst this is not the official geological determination, there are many scientists around the world taking rock, soil and ice samples, and they're seeing layers of soot from burning coal, nuclear isotopes, they're from the nuclear detonations, they're seeing persistent chemicals and all sorts of residue of humanity. And this is also connected to the work being done to demonstrate that there are certain limits that the Earth has and that we need to work within what's called planetary boundaries. Now, we know that we've exceeded those when it comes to climate change, but also we've started to exceed it when it comes to other critical factors such as biodiversity loss. So let's just take one of the problems and explore it in more detail. We live in a world where we're kind of addicted to waste. We produce so much of it. And unfortunately, only around 20% of the world's waste is actually recaptured and recycled. Around a third of it escapes into the natural world, which is how we end up with things like ocean plastic waste. And the rest of it is managed, meaning it's either put in landfills, open dumps, or burnt for incineration. The amount of waste we produce is phenomenal. And the issue with waste is that every time we waste a material, meaning every time it ends up in landfill or in the environment, we have to go back to nature to take that material again. This is the linear system where we design things to meet human needs, we manufacture them, use them, and then ultimately they end up as waste. This linear system is inherently unsustainable because it is engineered to exploit and extract resources from nature and then create pollution at the end of life. It's fundamentally flawed. Nothing in nature is like this. And if we take one of the products in our global economy, like the average plastic water bottle, and we think about all of the energy that goes into mining, extracting, processing, not the water, just the plastic for the bottle, and you start to see the scope and scale of the impacts that our desires and demands are having. 1 million every single minute is the number of plastic water bottles that are consumed and discarded. 1 million. And of the millions and millions of tons of plastic produced every year, only 9% of all plastic ever produced has ever been recycled. And in the last 15 years alone, we've created 50% of the plastic that's actually in the economy right now. So these are quite staggering concepts. And here's the tragedy of this linear system. We're addicted to waste, and therefore we are also unfortunately addicted to quick fix solutions. And whilst recycling would be an incredible solution if done properly within a circular economy, unfortunately right now, the fact that we have recycling means that we validate waste. Because we think we can recycle something, it drives the economy to produce more single-use products, which then creates more waste in the system. But there are other ways of meeting our needs. And this is where learning from nature is such a critical thing for us to all think about. Nature is an incredibly regenerative system. Every single thing within a natural ecosystem has a role to play. And this is a fantastic way to look at how we can redesign our economy. So everything in nature has a role, and therefore there is no waste. And one of the concepts that we play with here is called nature-based solutions, learning how complex ecosystems work together to create the conditions for cycling nutrients through the systems and therefore not having any waste. And we're seeing solutions such as bio-based materials that would then be able to be digested back into the natural world. So leathers made out of pineapple or other materials made from the symbiotic scobies from kombucha. I mean, there's a huge amount of R&D going into developing new types of bio-based materials. And this is cool because what we're looking at, especially when it's a byproduct of another industry, is mimicking the natural systems of cycling these materials through rather than creating materials that can't be benignly and appropriately reabsorbed into the natural world. So this is the proposition of the circular economy. How do we redesign the goods and services, the materials and processes that make the modern economy in a sustainable and regenerative way? It's a big challenge, but there's a lot of different approaches. So I'm sure you're familiar with some of these solutions. So there's not one size fits all. Different product categories, different types of services require different types of circularization strategies, from sharing or leasing, reusing, repairing, remanufacturing. And of course, recycling is part of this, but it is not the only thing we rely on. In fact, recycling is really one of the lower level solutions that we put in place because we want to keep valuable materials in the economy for as long as possible. And this is the exciting thing. There's a huge business opportunity in redesigning for the circular economy because not only do you provide higher value and more desirable experiences to your customers, you're also saving money on raw materials, as well as ensuring that you're creating a relationship with your customers and not just selling them a product and hoping for the best with the end-of-life options available to them. So just to break this down in a little bit more detail, the circular economy proposes this transformation of the way materials flow through the economy. First of all, we have what's called the technical nutrients. So anything that's made, technically, so I have a little mouse here, it's got metal, it's got plastic, it's got glass, it's got a whole bunch of technology inside it, making it work. And then this is obviously a technical product. I also have a piece of cork here that I'm using as a mouse pad, and that is, of course, a biological nutrient. It could easily be absorbed back into nature without creating any negative or adverse effects. So that would go through the biological side of this system. And this one would go in the technical, meaning that this could be biodigested, it could be composted at the end of life, and those raw materials could be reused, say as it could be captured and methane could be used as a form of power, and then the residual compost could be used for agriculture. And then with the technical product, because it can't be benignly digested into nature, would have to be designed for disassembly, reconfiguration, and the unreusable parts recycled. And that's really the key thing about the circular economy, is that we are making sure that we are designing for the end of life right from the start, that we're not hoping that the system will fix the problem, which is currently what most producers do. They create products, they sell them to you and I, and then the people responsible for dealing with the waste at the end of life, whether it be from packaging or the product itself, is you and me and our societies. Our governments have to pay for the removal of waste. They have to find locations to bury it or burn it. And this is really one of the fundamental flaws in our current economy, is that companies are allowed to put the burden of waste onto us as consumers, which is very unfair, because globally right now, the amount of resources that are recaptured and reused is extremely small compared to the amount of resources we extract from nature, process into usable goods. The more we waste, the more we have to take from nature, and that's fundamentally flawed. And so businesses are critical in this transformation. They each have the opportunity to understand what is their value in the economy, what do they create, and what do people then invest in, and how do we redesign that value proposition to be sustainable and circular. Now, I've created a pretty simple framework to help companies explore that, and I also have recently released a little book to help people within the business community consider their operational, product, and experiential impacts. Now, to break this down, essentially, all companies will have some form of operational impact. They will use energy and they will produce waste, they'll have infrastructure and they'll have procurement systems and they'll have travel for their staff. And this is the very low-hanging fruit, the kind of 101 of sustainability. make sure your operations you've measured and audited your activities, and then you're taking action to mitigate, reduce, and design better solutions. But the fundamental impacts that most companies have are in their products and the experiences that people have in engaging with their products. So thinking about the experience side of things, this isn't just, how somebody buys your product and how they use it. It's really thinking about the relationship that customers have with what you're offering and their understanding of the company and the role that the company is playing in society, and the way in which a customer is directed to utilize the services or products created. So I'll give you an example. I was recently in a hotel in Europe, and there was a conference, and when I arrived in the hotel room, they had a delightful glass bottle. It was empty, and it had a little label on it that explained that I could refill it for my drinking needs during my stay from a refill station on the floor of the hotel. And I went there, and it was beautifully designed. You could have room temperature water, cold water, seltzer water. It was filtered, clean water. And so I filled it up, and that's what I used. I had no plastic bottles. And it was funny because whilst I really enjoyed it, I wanted to know what some of the other people in the hotel who perhaps weren't necessarily as inclined to care about sustainability as me. And several people commented on how much they enjoyed the experience. It was so well thought through. It was such an enjoyable thing to do that they didn't notice the deficit of not having the plastic convenient water bottle. And that's what I mean by the importance of experience design when it comes to creating products and services for the circular economy. Because we can make sustainable products, we can design circular business models, but unless it's beautiful, frictionless, and desirable, unless the experience is designed, then it's unlikely people are going to adapt and enjoy the adaptation. So that's why the experience element is so critical in achieving circularization. So let's focus on the product as well, because that's what I think is the biggest scope. So one of the key ideas of sustainability and circularization is impact assessment. We have to understand what's going on currently before we can start to make changes. And then we need to assess the impacts of our changes and choices, because otherwise we're just kind of guessing. And unfortunately, when we're guessing, we could make unintended consequences. So there are well-respected tools available like environmental auditing, social impact assessment, and sustainable supply chain analysis. And one of my personal favorites, and I think one of the best tools, life cycle thinking and life cycle assessment. Now, if you're not familiar with this, it's a global scientific assessment process of exploring the way in which materials move through the economy and the impact that they have on the environment based on functional delivery. So everything that's produced is achieving functionality. And a coffee cup is carrying hot liquid, and it is ensuring you don't get burnt and you don't spill it on yourself. And there are multiple different materials and forms that can be used to achieve that function. So any product can be assessed based on its functional delivery. Now, the assessment process is governed by an ISO standard, International Standard Organization 14,000 series, which defines how the assessment, data, and communication can be done. And these are important tools, and I highly recommend, if you're a big product producing company, that you explore using life cycle assessment. But from a design perspective, we use what's called life cycle thinking to understand like a current snapshot of what's happening for an existing product. And this is about exploring all of the different life cycle stages that a product goes through. Everything produced comes from nature at some point. We always go back to nature to get materials, and those materials required land to be changed in order to get them. So it's rare these days that we're just going directly to nature, to a natural pristine environment and extracting things. We've often changed land use and therefore changed ecosystems. So we're always reflecting what changed in the natural world to give us these materials and what is that impact. Then we're looking at how those materials can be formed in order to create usable goods and services. That's the manufacturing phase. Now, across the life of a product, you'll have packaging and transportation and their own series of impacts, as well as the use. That's where you and I come in. And the use phase, surprisingly, often has quite a lot of impacts. If the product is what we call an active product, meaning that you need constant inputs. A cell phone has to be charged, and it relies on the service of cellular networks, which has its own series of impacts in order to function. Whereas a chair doesn't really have a lot of technology or anything associated with it, so it's a passive product. But nowadays, because of the Internet of Things, we're making more and more passive products active. They require charging, they require the internet, and all of those things have impacts. The internet has a huge impact. In fact, most of the information and technology sector requires the same amount of energy and produces the same amount of carbon emissions as the airline industry. So, the choices we make with regards to the technology in our homes or the types of services we provide our customers has an impact. Some of it is invisible, and that's why this tool is so important to kind of expose where impacts are occurring and how we can redesign them so they're more sustainable. So once we've used a product, then we have the end of life scenarios. And every product, depending on how it's designed, whether it's designed for disassembly, if it's designed for recyclability, that will impact its end of life destination. And then you have to think about the culture or the city or the community that the product is living in, and is it likely it would be recaptured, or is it likely it would escape into nature because there is an appropriate waste management? There are many factors to consider, and you can do a life cycle map of existing products to get your base case to then think about how to redesign it for the circular economy. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of this talk that I have free available resources. I have a great redesign toolkit that walks you through exactly how to do this, and you can download that from the Unschools website for free and go ahead and use that in your workplace. So what I'm getting at here is that it's very critical that we see this as a full picture perspective, that we're not just designing things to be recyclable or designing things to be taken back, that we're looking at the materials, the experiences, and we're really considering what I call full system sustainability. And this is important because sometimes we make decisions and we think they're a good decision, but without the science and data and information, we actually kind of end up just making solutions that cause new problems. I'm going to give you an example with cups. So around the world, everybody loves drinking coffee, and in the last 15, 20 years, it's become more and more common for people to drink coffee or tea in disposable cups. Now, there are several options that are on the market right now. You have the plastic ones, you have the paper ones, which are lined with plastic, and then you have reusable cups, ceramic ones, plastic ones, metal ones. There's lots of options. And when we had to think about what's the best solution here from a sustainability perspective, you have to use the reusable cup several times, hundreds if not thousands of times, to buy back the embodied environmental impact, so the energy required to mine the materials, process them, etc. And then you have to consider the washing. But the same with the plastic and the paper. These are single use. There's all of the embodied impact, production, and then the impact of waste. And each of them has a different type of impact, which is why using life cycle thinking and assessment is so critical, because you can compare each of these and gain a better understanding of where impacts are occurring and when you have environmental benefits. So paper cups are unrecyclable because they're lined with plastic. The plastic cup, surprisingly, is a lot easier to recycle because of the plastic it's made out of, but this type of cup won't carry coffee. It can only have iced drinks. So you see, it starts to get a bit complicated, which is why we need to have these processes like life cycle thinking to take a snapshot assessment and figure out how to redesign for the circular economy. The types of things we need to think through. What are the materials? What's the functionality of those materials and the product? What's the use case? Meaning, how will somebody engage with this product? Under what conditions? What's the service offering? Do they walk away with it? Do they sit down? What are the opportunities for giving people a reusable, highly valuable intervention? So these cases now are coffee cups in, say, universities or small towns where they're reusable, very durable materials, and they've got an RFID tag or something to be able to check it out, like at a supermarket or a library. Drink your coffee and then drop your used cup back to a station where it's washed and then redeployed through the system. This is a classic circularization solution. And then you have to think about washing, durability, and what you do, how you recapture these assets. So a lot of the time there needs to be a tech-based solution to manage elements of a circular intervention. But there are so many opportunities here, and that's why it's very important upfront. Understand your base case across those three areas: operations, products, experiences. Get that snapshot, through life cycle thinking, supply chain sustainability assessments as well, and then figure out how to redesign it for the circular economy using the suite of what we call sustainable design strategies and circular business models. So in the sustainable design strategies, it's things like design for dematerialization, reducing the amount of materials, designed for disassembly, ensuring that it can be cost effectively disassembled and reconfigured. That requires plans, it requires repair components, it requires different fixtures. Another one is design for modularity, so things can be adapted to different use cases. And there are many different strategies at play. I've written extensively about this, and again, if you download any of my toolkits, you can find more details on these. But one of the main propositions is the transformation towards what we call products as service models or product service systems. And this is where we take a product that's currently sold as a linear product, and we figure out how to redesign it so that it is based on a product fitting within a service and a system or experience. And so, for example, if you're designing chairs, you might design a chair that is used in an office setting, and you would consider how it could be repaired and upgraded, how it could be disassembled very efficiently and components reused in your manufacturing system, and then you would lease the service of that chair to your customer. And then if it breaks or something happens to it, you can take it back, cost effectively reconfigure it and redeploy it into the system. That's a very basic version of this. But basically, the idea is to think about how to own the value of the product across its life, and as the company, then be able to redeploy those materials over time in different ways to make different types of economic benefits. That covers the cost of managing the system. Again, full systems perspective, and it's so important because right now we are lagging behind when it comes to activating the circular economy. Unfortunately, we still have so much work and room to move, and this is where other tools like systems thinking are so important. The more people who can think about the whole before the parts and can see the big picture as well as the micro elements, the more transformation we can have in the economy. Systems thinking is a very powerful tool of understanding relationships and cause and effect, rather than just seeing the obvious part of the system and thinking, oh, well, recycling will be the solution, or we just need to make people educated on the issues, which unfortunately hasn't really worked to date. We really need to transform our value system. We need to make sure that human values are aligned with the natural world and that we dive beyond the obvious part of the problems and learn to love them from a deeper perspective. There are many tools that help support systems thinking. For example, going from linear to circular. Rather than seeing individual parts, we see the whole and then the parts, and also about relationships, interdependence, and interconnectedness. Systems thinking helps us ensure that today's solutions do not become tomorrow's problems, which unfortunately, all of the issues we're seeking to address, economic issues, social issues, environmental issues, are unfortunately great ideas of the past. So that's why we use systems thinking to ensure that the solutions we put in play today don't have unintended consequences. Now, in the last few minutes I have left, I know I've covered a lot. I wanted to just give you a little warning about if you are embarking on a sustainability and circular journey, to make sure you do use science and data, because it's very important that you can back up any claims that you make. Because if you can't validate your claims, then unfortunately you could fall into the trap of greenwashing. Greenwashing is when companies make claims that they can't back up, often to try and capture those consumers I mentioned at the beginning who are interested in sustainability. I've noticed in my years of working with companies that a lot of the time this happens accidentally. They don't hire the right people, they don't understand the science, they don't invest in the knowledge that they need, and they don't equip their team members with the right tools, their designers, their engineers, their marketing managers, so they understand how to use the language and what the rules and regulations are around that. There's been many cases of big companies getting in a lot of trouble for greenwashing. So be careful and make sure that you validate or back up any claims you make. This doesn't mean don't get involved in sustainability. In fact, I think every company of every size in the next few years will have to have a pretty strong sustainability mandate, because this is where the economy is going. Again, lots of free resources available to you on my website, which hopefully will help you think about how to apply this. So make sure that you validate your claims, that you use the science, that you think about the systems, and you design the experience and the products to be part of this circular movement, and help your team members or your colleagues, friends and family think about sustainability differently. It's a technical skill set. It's an amazing tool that can help any career design a future that works better for all of us. And really, if you want to see that happen, a better future, then the change starts with each of us right now. The only way we change things is by changing ourselves and the world around us. So I really, really hope this has helped give you some thoughts and some ideas and some tools, and that you go ahead and find ways to really activate this, not just talk about it, but get it into your companies, get it into your lifestyle, and so we can all have a better future. Again, thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to hearing about all of your successes in the future. Thank you.